Very good afternoon and welcome to this online policy dialogue on recovering from COVID-19, sustainable development goals as a compass. We are joined today by a distinguished panel of speakers, including Olga Algayerová, who is the Executive Secretary for United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. We're waiting for Jeffrey Sachs, President for Center for Sustainable Development from Columbia University, as well as the President for UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, to join us. Hopefully he will be able to connect with us shortly. And we also have Declan Costello, Deputy Director General at the DG for Economic and Financial Affairs from the European Commission, joining us today. As for the topic of today, and very warm welcome, Mr. Sachs. It's great that you're able to join us as well. You are muted at the moment, but I just introduced our distinguished panel and said that you may be running just a few minutes late, but we're very delighted to have you join us as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming today. As for the topic of today, and I'll start by just saying some words of introduction. When the world leaders back in 2015 agreed on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, this was seen as the global roadmap for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable future. And at the core of the agenda were the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which include specific calls for action and global cooperation to address our multiple challenges, including climate change, depletion of natural resources, poverty, instability, and inequalities. Now, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit the world, it obviously led to serious economic and societal consequences, economic and human costs in the EU as well as beyond. And it also impacted the global SDG agenda. At the same time, while the firefighting continues with the pandemic and its repercussions today, arguably the ongoing crisis provides us an unprecedented opportunity to rethink about our economies and societies. We have several tools available, also in the EU, to use the ongoing recovery to transition towards the future we actually want. And here, arguably, the SDGs can provide a valuable compass for policies and investments of today. A good example is the public money that has been made available to address the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the EU, we hear a lot of reference to using the crisis to build back better in line with the goals of the European Green Deal. And indeed, arguably, the EU's long-term budget, coupled with Next Generation EU, that is designed to boost the recovery, could play a strong role in these efforts. But how good are we actually in aligning the ongoing recovery efforts with the SDGs? And that's the question we hope to pose to our speakers today and try to seek answers for. So today we'll be discussing the EU's progress on the Agenda 2030 targets, the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on SDG-aligned investments, and what are the different ways to align the ongoing recovery efforts with the SDGs. And we'll be touching upon, I hope, many of the tools that we have available for that. Before I give the floor to our speakers, I would like to remind our audience that if you are interested to ask questions, and there are two ways for you to do that, I'll give you opportunities to speak after our speakers have spoken, and during the event you can also use the space provided to ask short written questions. With these words, I'll be happy to give the floor first to Miss Olga Algayerová from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. And it would be excellent to hear your evaluation on how you see Europe's efforts in achieving the Agenda 2030 targets, and how good do you find are the European countries in aligning recovery efforts with the SDGs? Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Annika, for your kind introduction, and excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It's really my great pleasure to speak today about the opportunities for Europe to build back, or I prefer to recover better from the COVID-19 pandemic. To begin, let me first express my gratitude to the European Policy Center for the organization of this very timely event. So back to the topic, let me start with a clear statement. Sustainability is the defining existential challenge of our time. As we seek to overcome the devastation brought by the COVID-19 pandemic worldwide, we cannot lose sight of other unfolding crises. We can speak about economic, financial, social, but namely climate change and the environmental pressures brought by our insatiable appetite for resources. Even before the pandemic struck, there were serious reasons for concern regarding the unsatisfactory pace of progress towards the 2030 agenda, both in the EU and in the broader membership of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe region. Earlier this year, we prepared an SDG progress report that explicitly asked whether the UNEC region, it means the 56 states of North America, Europe, Central Asia, and the Caucasus, was on track to meet the goals by 2030. On the basis of past trends, the region would achieve only 23 targets by 2030. Progress in 57 targets should accelerate. For 9 others, trends are negative and need to be reversed. While the UNEC region is rather diverse, much needs to be done regarding climate change and the environment. Specifically for the EU, while much progress has been achieved in many areas, including in particular no poverty, what is SDG 1, and peace and strong institution, what is SDG 16, a fundamental challenge remains, and that is how to reconcile the aspirations for increased economic prosperity with the reduction of environmental pressures and rapid progress towards climate neutrality. I really welcome the strong ambition shown in the latest EU initiatives, including the commitment to cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030. This will unleash a wave of transformation across many sectors and activities, including in areas such as transport, energy, or housing, where UNEC is deeply engaged. And this ambition is necessary. Long and short-term trends show that although the share of renewables in gross final consumption has been increasing in the EU, the pace of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions has been insufficient. And the COVID-19 crisis set back the implementation of the 2030 agenda and led to only a temporary respite from environmental pressures. So, ladies and gentlemen, how do we move forward as the COVID-19 emergency wanes? We need to use the opportunities created by recovery plans to provide a new impetus to the implementation of the 2030 agenda. However, analysis of spending plans worldwide has shown a mixed picture. In the EU, there is a clear commitment to use the next generation EU recovery plan to give an impulse to sustainability, including by setting minimum targets for spending on climate objectives. It is important that any temptation for greenwashing is avoided and that investment plans are accompanied by appropriate policies aligned with sustainability goals. And we need to take a broader look. Actions in one country or sub-region have impacts on others. Most SDGs have a transboundary component, mostly, but not only, related to the environment. For UNEC, addressing transboundary issues is a major area of work, acting together with the EU countries and the rest of our member states. For example, let's take air pollution. It can travel hundreds of kilometers from its origin and cannot be tackled only by local solutions. The success of the UNEC Air Convention in increasing life expectancy in the region shows how powerful international cooperation can be in addressing these questions. Finding solutions to transboundary issues requires, therefore, that the relevant standards and norms be widely used, not just in the EU, but across the whole UNEC region. And that requires coordination, cooperation, and capacity building for those countries that may require it. So how do we enhance the impact of our actions? The 2030 agenda is indivisible, but also interlinked. Progress in one area cannot be achieved in detriment of advances in other areas. There are relationships between the different goals, positive and negative, that needs to be considered to effectively advance implementation. The good news is that there are more synergies than trade-offs between SDGs. This facilitates policy solutions with multiple impacts. For example, reducing the use of fossil fuels boosts climate change mitigation efforts, but it also improves health outcomes. Critically, this co-benefit can be reached within a shorter term horizon, thus facilitating political acceptability. The shift to a circular economy has also multiple benefits across many different SDGs, including responsible consumption and production, what, as we know, is SDG 12, water, SDG 6, energy, SDG 7, sustainable cities, SDG 11, climate action, SDG 13, and many others. I welcome the importance that the EU attaches to this issue and the ambition of its circular economy action plan. The topic was the theme of the recent session of the Economic Commission for Europe, which gave a renewed impulse to our work in the area of circular economy. But we need also to be realistic and acknowledge the existence of negative interactions between various goals. The energy transition will have disruptive effects that need to be addressed in order to avoid political resistance to the changes and protect vulnerable populations. And this is necessary and it is fair. In this decade of action, we need faster progress to achieve the SDGs, but to know how fast we need to run, we need a good idea of how far we are from the targets. Good data is not only the basis of good technical analysis, it is the enabler of meaningful political and societal debate about future actions. As I mentioned earlier, the UNEC SDG Progress Report, it found that for 80 targets, it is almost half of the total, there is no sufficient national data to track change over time. Much progress is necessary, therefore, not only to meet the targets, but also to improve data availability, even in countries with well-developed statistical systems. The Eurostat annual monitoring report on sustainable development also notes that data is insufficient. UNEC plays a central role in developing new methodologies and improving national statistical systems. It has a long-standing collaboration with Eurostat, including in relation to the work of the Conference of European Statisticians, which is hosted by the UNEC. International cooperation is critical to develop sound, comparable data, and also to provide support to those countries who need it most. This is and will remain a central concern in our work. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude with a final observation. An infectious disease is a powerful reminder of our common humanity, of the links that bind us, of the impact that our actions have on others, a problem that is not truly solved if it is not solved for all. In an interconnected world, sustainability islands are no solution. We need international cooperation. Thank you for your attention. Look forward for discussion.
Thank you, Olga, and thank you for reminding of the interconnectedness between the SDGs, about the positive as well as the negative, and how important it is to keep this comprehensive picture in mind as we hope to progress on the SDGs. I'll hand over the floor now to Jeffrey Sachs. I already introduced you, but indeed you're president for the Center for Sustainable Development Columbia University, as well as the president for UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, as well as an SDG advocate for the UN. So you really know what you're talking about, and we'll be delighted to hear your, first of all, obviously evaluation on how do you see the state of play with the implementation of the SDGs at the moment, and also if you can share a bit of your thinking on what is the rationale for aligning the ongoing recovery efforts and investments with the SDGs and the means to achieve this. That would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Great, Annika. Thank you so much. And thanks for inviting me to the panel. Let me maybe say a word about the SDGs globally and then the SDGs in Europe. Globally, we're in a mess. We're in a deep crisis that was already not so good in 2019. And COVID, of course, has really worsened everything. It's worsened the health crises, the economies, the ability to think ahead more than a day at a time, the ability to plan for the future. It has thrown hundreds of millions of kids out of school. This is a very deep and continuing crisis. And I would say almost no part of the world has done a good job in responding to COVID. Probably the most successful country in responding to COVID is China, which has broken transmission, kept deaths very low, kept cases very low. But we don't want to look at that too carefully, but we should. Europe and the United States have not done well in COVID, and we're battling Delta, Lambda, Mu, and I can tell you there are a lot more letters in the Greek alphabet coming up, and so we had better get more organized. For the SDGs, it is a kind of body blow because we're in late 2021. These are goals that are supposed to be achieved by 2030, and we're, battling by the hour just to stay afloat. And we can't even make basic systems work right now. For example, getting immunizations to Africa. Isn't it amazing that fully vaccinated Africans are less than 3% of the population because our global cooperation didn't work. The vaccine producing countries kept them for themselves, gave very little to the rest of the world so far. And we have a continent of 1.4 billion people without immunizations to date. So this is the broad truth that we really have had a hard time cooperating. And I can tell you a lot of the trouble comes with my country, the United States. We had a psychopath as president, unfortunately, for 4 years, who was against all forms of cooperation. He still is politically very influential. His party is against anything rational, I'm afraid. We have a Republican Party actively campaigning against vaccines, against wearing face masks, against anything you can think of that would be constructive right now. And so we're in a surge of Delta. The Biden administration, much better, of course, but overwhelmed with internal problems. Afghanistan and all the rest, hardly a force for global change right now or global leadership, really basically trapped in a domestic, really a domestic battle for the future of the United States itself, because that's what we're facing. So we don't even talk about sustainable development goals in the United States. I can tell you the phrase is barely heard. We're trying to pass some basic legislation, keep teachers and students from getting sick from a pandemic, from governors that want to block the use of face masks. It's a nightmare here. Okay, that's the dark side. Let me talk about the brighter side, because on the brighter side, if, and I'm counting on it, Europe getting beyond COVID and the world getting beyond COVID, there's no question that Europe is way ahead of the rest of the world in the SDGs overall, because these are pretty core European values and goals. And so I look at Europe as the exemplar and the role model of what to do when it comes to the SDGs. Now, again, I'm putting aside COVID because the response has not been too great. But for the SDGs as a whole, I can tell you in our annual Sustainable Development Report, I'll just give you this year's rankings. Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Belgium, Austria, Norway, France, Slovenia, Estonia, Netherlands, Czech Republic, Ireland, Croatia, Poland, the top 15 countries in the world. That's out of 150 countries. The top 15 countries, every one of them an EU member. So how could I not but love what Europe is doing in general, because Europe's idea is prosperity, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability. And the two ways to make that happen, one is a social democratic ethos, which is that we tax a lot and we use that for ensuring universal access to goods and services and infrastructure. And second, we cooperate regionally, which is essential for sustainable development any place. So the fact that Europe has the European Union is itself a magnificent part of the reason why the top 15 countries are all EU member countries. Let me say, by the way, that it's not just that Europe is on top of the Sustainable Development Goal Index globally. Europe is also on top of the World Happiness Report, the other report that I produce each year with the co-editors. In 2021, the rankings are Finland, Denmark, Switzerland, let in a non-EU member, but a European member, Iceland, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Luxembourg, the top 8. Then New Zealand sneaks in there, then Austria, Australia, Israel, Germany, Canada, Ireland, and so on. My point is that sustainable development, the SDGs, and happiness actually are pretty well aligned, because what do we want from society? We want societies that are prosperous, that are fair, and that are environmentally sustainable. So I don't think it's a big mystery why we want to align with the SDGs, because we want to align with sustainability and with sustainable development, because that's, as the UN says, the future we want. That's what we need to do. But what would I say in terms of what Europe ought to do beyond getting COVID better under control? A couple of things. First, implement the European Green Deal. It's terrific. It is a comprehensive framework. It is the most important comprehensive framework in the world for sustainable development. It's the role model for the world. Just make sure it gets implemented. And that requires investment. That requires a good plan for decarbonization. That requires a good plan for land management for the farm to fork program. That requires universal digital access. And that requires that Europe remain at the center of innovation for the future. So spend a lot of money on research and development and innovation to get this done. Okay, that's the key for within Europe. But the second thing that we really, really, really need is Europe's diplomatic leadership. Believe me, the US will not, cannot provide it. I'm sorry to tell you, it's the truth right now. We're struggling here. It's a weird place and a weird situation. And we're not going to lead on the SDGs. We're not going to lead, even though President Biden wants to. We're not going to lead on climate. We're struggling to get anything done right now. So Europe, please lead. And I would just make the following points. First, lead at COP26 for every country to commit to zero by 2050. This is the basic point. And we're getting closer, and Europe set the standard, and it's possible to move farther. Second, please help really with Africa's challenges, because Africa is in very, very difficult crisis, and the financing is completely inadequate. The scale of international development finance is a shadow of what's really needed. We've got to help African countries get all the kids in school. This is the single most important thing we can do for humanity, is help the children. It's not happening right now. It requires financing. It really requires Europe's lead. And the third point that I would mention, and just to close here, is please cooperate with China. The US has some crazy idea about confrontation or Cold War. The last thing this world needs is more tension globally. What we actually need is cooperation. And we shouldn't view things like the Belt and Road Initiative as some terrible threat. We should view it as an opportunity for cooperation. We shouldn't view China as some terrible threat. We should view China as a constructive partner for achieving sustainable development. We should be cooperating on vaccine production and distribution, on ending COVID-19, where China's done a very good job internally, on constructing infrastructure across Eurasia, on cooperating in Africa. And Europe needs this diplomacy for all of its ambition. And Europe is, in my view, the leading cooperator in the world, and a great mission for Europe. But we will not achieve the SDGs with another Cold War. We will not achieve the SDGs with confrontation, and we will not achieve the SDGs on the path that we're on right now. So we really need to up the game, up the financing, up the ambition, and I think Europe is really the inspiration as the region that's in the lead on all of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for putting forward, first of all, some of the concerns, some of the good remarks on the EU's progress and the hope that there may lie ahead, but then also providing some very concrete suggestions for the way forward. And we'll be very happy to pick on these. Hopefully already Declan and Costello will be able to pick on some of these, but we certainly will come back to these also during the discussion. But I'll hand over now to Declan and Costello from DG Economic and Financial Affairs from the European Commission, and we'll be especially interested to hear what extent are the SDGs guiding EU's ongoing recovery efforts and investments. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Annika. Hello to the panelists. Hello to everybody. So let me say a few remarks about how I see the SDGs as a compass or a guide for our economic, social policies and development. And I think it would be fair to say that they were fairly central, or even not very central, to economic, social policy making for many years, and that's reflected in some of Jeffrey's remarks on how, on a relative scale, how well we have been doing. But I think it did take a definite step upwards with the arrival of the College of President von der Leyen. Now, when she was appointed, she very much set out in her flagship initiatives that green and digital was to be the core of this commission. And also on the Sustainable Development Goals, there was a recognition that these really do need to be mainstreamed even more into our policy setting. In fact, I mean, the commissioner I report to, Commissioner Gentiloni, in the mandate that he was given by the president, it was to integrate the Sustainable Development Goals into our primary vehicle for economic policy coordination, the European semester. So I think it really, it was there already, but it did take a step. It did take a step up. Now when the new college started, we not only talked about ambition, we then set about trying to convert that into actual action and implementation. Now the first step in doing that was in what was called the annual sustainable growth survey that was issued in November 2019, where in a sense it tried to recast, if you will, the green digital ambition of President von der Leyen into our economic strategy. And that was around the concept, the four-pillar concept of competitive sustainability. So this was about the green transition, the digital transition and productivity, which has been a major drag on your growth for Europe for a long time. Also about macroeconomic stability, but it was also about fairness, social inclusion, education, health, pensions, all those critical systems. And that kind of was, we recast, if you will, the framework. Europe then set about publishing the Green Deal, and then COVID came along. So that obviously put the spanner in the works in terms of our initial intentions. In terms of the impact on the Sustainable Development Goal, as Olga pointed out, we had been making progress, slow progress, maybe not enough progress or fast enough progress in some areas. But clearly it had, it was a setback in areas like health outcomes, certainly employment outcomes. I think also in terms of social and inequalities, it was clearly, it had some very, very visible impacts in terms of the differential impact. We saw very clearly, those sectors of the, those groups in society which had, let's say, the most fragile or weaker attachment to the labor market or the less protection, they suffered the most. We saw, for example, the digital divide come out much, much stronger than, let's say, it was there, of course, before, but it became much, much more important. So it was a setback. Now, the positive news is Europe is recovering relatively quickly, actually more quickly than we had initially feared and anticipated. And it kind of remains to be seen how long and how deep some of the structural scarring and impacts will be. But nonetheless, it was a setback. I think, though, where the positive comes is in terms of policies. And particularly the capacity to design and implement policies which can really accelerate our progress towards the green and digital transition and other aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals. And when I'm talking here, I'm really talking about the capacity and willingness to have policies at European level. Now, we had relatively limited responsibilities in healthcare. I know Jeffrey seems to be critical of some of our performance here, and of course, there's definitely areas where it could have been done. But I mean, what you've seen very quickly is the need to coordinate policy responses. You've obviously seen in terms of the vaccine procurement and rollout. I think it really does show the need for strong centralized policies in those areas where there clearly are European, if not global public goods. A very dramatic example of this was on unemployment, short-term work schemes and support, where we set up and implemented the SURE unemployment support schemes. Now, this was concessional borrowing. I mean, this thing didn't exist. In April of last year, or April 2019, and it already has been up and running. We have already actually spent, I think, 95% of the funds have been created. 19 member states have taken advantage of that. Many countries have set up these, or extended short-term working schemes as an additional tool of flexibility and support in keeping people engaged in the labor market. So it's a big success. But really, I think the game changer, on this in terms of our policy capacity has been not only the MFF, but the Recovery and Resilience Facility of the Next Generation EU. Over 660 billion euros available, a lot of that in grants. First time that we can have common borrowing to finance this, and also an allocation key where the resources are allocated really on the basis on needs. Those countries most vulnerable, most affected by COVID, and where they really do need scope to not only deal with the immediate impact of COVID, but also to help them deal with the consequences of the recovery. I mean, we saw with the global financial crisis that when some sort of fiscal, when one needs to sort of go back to some degree of fiscal consolidation or sustainability, the first thing which is cut is public investment. And now the scale of the transfers to those, a number of our member states are macroeconomically significant, and it means that they should not, there's no reason for public investment levels, investments on the green and digital transition to be cut. There is actually scope to actually increase it over and above pre-COVID or pre-COVID levels. Now, I'll just say a couple of words about the Recovery and Resilience Facility, if you allow me. I mean, first of all, it is very much centered around the Sustainable Development Goals. There's the regulation establishes 6 pillars, which are essentially green, digital, social, health, you name it. It's maybe not exactly framed in the 17 categories or the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but it could be, or it's very, very close. The second thing, of course, is a lot of the funding is going to be earmarked towards the green and digital transition. So 37% for climate, 20% for digital. And also it's not a formal target, but there is a requirement on the member states and the Commission to take a very close look at the social dimension, gender equality, and also institutional and capacity building. These are explicit objectives in the regulation. Now, the kind of message I want to pass is we really are at the implementation phase. Now, 25 member states have submitted plans. We're still waiting for, I think, 2 of them. The Commission has already approved 18, and the Council, I think, actually, I've got it wrong. The Council has with the Czech Republic. The Council this week will mean that with the Czech Republic and Ireland, they should that should be 2 more. So full 18 up and running. We have dispersed close to 50 billion euros already in terms of pre-financing. And we have been able to go to the bond markets and borrow the money. So we're very, very much on the implementation phase. And again, I would also like to stress that, it is, we can discuss how we did the tagging of the green spending or the climate spending and the digital spending. Because obviously there is a concern to avoid greenwashing, and that's very, very important. But I think what we've basically seen in the content of the plans is, somebody was involved in the negotiation. A genuine and concerted effort was really made to be very, very thorough on this. Now, what we've seen in terms of the climate action is actually member states are exceeding the 37% target. It's closer to 40%. In some cases, it's actually a very, very significant, well above that 37% target. In terms of the breakdown, where are we seeing the money going? Well, about 35% would be going on sustainable mobility, close to 20% on clean power, and another 27% on energy efficiency. So a lot going into the renovation of residential properties and public buildings. And then there's other funding on biodiversity and the circular economy. So we really are genuinely seeing, I think, a good spread and good efforts. And this would be directly, I think, relevant for at least 5 of the Sustainable Development Goals. Number 7 on clean energy, sustainable cities. Number 11. Number 12 on responsible consumption and production, climate action. So I think it's genuine. I mentioned on the social side here, again, we didn't have an explicit target in terms of the spending, but what we're seeing is something between 20 to 40% could probably be determined or be allocated or considered as relevant for social expenditure. And what are these things on? These things are things like there's a lot of money going into active labor market policies and training, especially on the digital skills, quite a bit going into healthcare. We see also a lot of investment in some countries on social services, and also targeting some of this spending on those groups which, let's say, are most disadvantaged or need to where the most investment is needed. I'd like to close by maybe emphasizing 2 or 3 points which I think are particularly important. It's not only about the money. Okay, I think there's 2 features of the recovery facility which are actually unique and could hopefully get us back on a track to meet the targets. The first is, this is the first instrument where we've been in one instrument able to combine reforms and investments. Okay, we've had policy tools in the past, like the European semester, where we could talk about reforms. We had structural funds where we could put investments or we could finance important investments. We've never had a tool where we're able to combine both. And that's actually critical to delivery. So if you're looking at, some of the areas on, some of the things on, for example, on, let's say the renovation or energy efficiency, it's not only about funding to support, renovation of public buildings or for municipalities or for rent properties. It also includes relevant reforms related to standards, improving, facilitating permits, licensing, whatever it will be. It's this combination of reforms and investments together is I think, very, very important. And it also means, by having a bit of money that you can put behind it, often reforms are quite difficult. And so we are able to, we can use the funding to overcome either opposition by certain groups, but also I think what was mentioned by Olga, the need for a just transition, to be able to, compensate the losers, especially if they don't have the, if they're going to, don't have the resources to meet the immediate upfront costs of these reforms. The second aspect of this, which I want to emphasize is, and I don't think people fully appreciate it, is it's performance-based, okay? It's very, very different to the structural funds. For the structural funds, member states, we have the operational programs, and the Commission reimburses on the basis of proof of incurred cost. Under the Recovery and Resilience Facility, what we do is we have defined outcome performance targets and what we call milestones and targets. Have you made the reform in terms of adopting and implementing the legislation with the necessary secondary legislative acts? In terms of the investments, show us the proof that you've renovated, whatever, 10,000 buildings. The invoices, all of the sort of detail of that is not the feature of the Recovery Resilience Facility. Now, this is a bit of an experiment. It remains to be seen how well it works, but it has the potential to transform, if you will, or be a very bit of a game changer in how we, let's say, interact with member states and pursue these very, very difficult reforms and investments, hopefully in a lighter, more efficient and productive way. Again, it's sort of, let's see if this works in practice. I mean, it's all about implementation. Final step, remark I'd just like to make is, well, two remarks. One is, of course, what I've talked about is, I've talked about a very small part of what we've been doing in the last year. I mean, there's the Fit for 55 program, our sustainable finance initiative. I think it's quite remarkable how the Commission has managed to, continue working on all of these files throughout the pandemic. The second is often, again, the European semester is our vehicle. It was partially put in suspense during the last year because of the immediate need to focus on COVID. We will be returning to, let's say, some of the key elements of the semester going forward in the next cycle. Sorry if I took too long.
Thank you so much, Declan, for this overview. I think that it was great, I think, for our audiences to know where we are with the plans, as well as what's in there, to get a bit of an overview of the member state actions in this regard. I would like just to do a very quick follow-up question to you. How pleased are you yourself with the member states' national recovery plans? Are there areas where you said that they could have actually done better? For example, I've heard some concerns that the member states may not have really considered, for example, the role that digitalization could play actually in addressing some of the sustainability challenges, so that there could be some of these gaps where perhaps member states would also need additional support in really using the money in the best possible way. But I'd be happy to hear your quick reaction to that.
Look, I think the headline answer is we are actually pleased with the quality of the plans we have received. I'm not saying that because I'm expected to say it. I think it's actually the case. I mean, I would say for many of the plans we've had maybe, I don't know, 800,000 meetings to go through it in considerable detail. Now, it did take a while in some cases to bring up the quality of the plan. I think in a number of countries, the focus was very much on the investments and the spending, and the reform part initially was maybe a little bit lacking, understandably. But I think if you actually look at the content of the plans, you really will see that they are heavily, there is a good balance between reforms and investments. I think we were actually pretty strict when it came to this tagging of counting what counts for climate and digital spending. I know it's a methodology, you can punch holes in it. I mean, it is what it is. We were very, very strict in terms of applying the do no significant harm principle. and ensuring that that is respected. So I think the overall answer is yes, and it's credit to many of the member states, but I think also this kind of really co-creation plus working with the Commission, I think was has actually paid off. So yes, overall good, but a plan is the plans are only the plans. It really comes down now, of course, to implementation.
And, thank you so much for highlighting the importance of implementation, because in the end, that will be the key. I'd be very happy to just give a very short chance for Olga and Jeffrey to come back if you wish to provide any reactions to what we heard from Declan, and especially on the recovery plans and EU's recovery efforts, if you have any thoughts on that. Olga, please.
Absolutely, thank you, Annika. First, just by one sentence, I liked Jeffrey's mentioning, he highlighted the need for cooperation, because if we have a conflict, war, if we don't cooperate, it's very difficult. It's really bringing us back or down with implementation of SDGs. And on China, we need to have a separate session, but I don't want to go into that now. I absolutely agree with Declan that it is not about money. And he mentioned, for instance, energy efficient buildings. And it clicked in my mind immediately. Buildings are responsible for 40% of combustion related CO2 emissions I speak about developed countries, and consume 70% of electrical power generated. So we don't have that money that EU has, but to tackle exactly this issue, UNECE has developed framework guidelines for energy efficiency standards in buildings. They accelerate the transformation to high performance buildings. We have several centers of excellence in New York City, in Pittsburgh, Vancouver, if I remember, in Brussels. And it is to advance the research, education, and the use of high performance building materials, design, and construction. So exactly what Declan told, not everything is about money. We need the standards or policy guidelines, we call it. And this is why we cooperate very closely with the EU in some areas. I wish we cooperate much more, because our standards are developed by almost 10,000 experts from 56 member states. So they are developed by consensus. So if they agree on that, then we can implement. So we maybe are not so powerful as the EU is in some instances. So the cooperation also is a key here. That's my comment here. Thank you, Annika.
Thank you. And Jeffrey, if you have any comments.
Just thanks a lot, and a great report by Declan, and very encouraging also. Two quick points I would make. One, I think Europe suffered for the fact that health is not a central responsibility. You cannot manage a pandemic country by country. This is absolutely one of the weak points of the global system, how weak the cooperation is globally. But even within Europe, it really was national responses to an important extent. And Europe should take lessons from that, because next time around, and unfortunately there will be next time around, we need a European-wide response. Second, on the plans, just one plea, it probably is happening, but energy systems cannot also be made 27 times and then somehow interconnected. The energy system works as a system. And so I just would actually, just a question for Declan, how do we make sure the pieces fit so that all of the benefits of connecting the North Sea wind and the Black Sea wind, which are anti-correlated, are actually achieved by a system-wide view rather than a country-by-country view? I hope it's happening. I count on it happening, but I'm not exactly sure how it happens.
And Declan, before you respond, because I'm very much aware of the time, and we have had several questions in the Q&A box, so I'd like to pick on some of these, and I would be happy to give all of you a chance to come back to these questions. And so there was another question was for Declan as well, that there was disappointed, earmarking of minimum spending for member states' social investment in the national plans. And this question comes from Amana Ferro. And the question is indeed that how can we ensure that the recovery actually delivers the required investment for a true social and health recovery and helps to deliver on the SDGs when this was missing. For Jeffrey, there was a question from Andreas Jennet that, or more of perhaps a comment, that actually, in addition to, while the happiness report is very good, the continent is very much challenged with loneliness, and it is one of the main drivers for the divisions in our societies, and also a threat to democracy. And I'll finish off with the question from Nico Keppens, who asked that what is the role for citizens? Many are worried about the consequences on living standards, the cost of the changes, and combined with the growing lack of trust in politicians and institutions, resilience will grow. And how do we tackle this? How do we get citizens on board? And I would like to rephrase this question a bit, is that what is the role that you see in for citizens, consumers, people in delivering on the SDGs? And maybe, if that's okay, we'll start with Olga and then Jeffrey, and finish with Declan. Thank you.
Yes, Annika, I answered 2 questions by
Excellent.
the
Thank
meantime,
you so much.
so I cannot speak about Geoffrey's happiness report, but societies
and role for citizens. How do you see that?
Role for I responded. I really believe we need to engage people. We need to engage young people, namely, because young people seem to be more aware about our consumption model of life, and they are environmentally, they are really caring about environmental sustainability. So we need to engage these young people, educate them, not to let them behind, not to let them alone. Now also the education was lacking a little bit last 1.5 years. So absolutely, citizens and young people are the key. Absolutely, absolutely, I agree.
Thank you very much. And for our audiences, indeed, some of the responses to the questions are in the Q&A box, so you can also go there to discover more. But Jeffrey, please.
I have no magic answers, of course, to the questions of loneliness and citizenship, but they're connected. The way we live is changing a lot. Of course, COVID is one thing, but even after COVID, this digital world of ours is changing a lot. The aging of populations is changing a lot. And again, I think Europe thinks a lot about these things more than most of the world, actually. How are we going to make sure we have a social environment? One thing that Europe does is it works fewer hours than the United States and takes longer vacations. This is smart, by the way. This is a good thing, not a bad thing. It horrifies the Wall Street Journal, but it actually is part of the reason why the quality of life is higher. People have time together, time with families, time with breaks. I think changing the way our cities are organized so that they're greener, more parks, more walking spaces, recovering the cities from the automobile, which was in a way ultimately the scourge of cities of the late 20th century, will be another part. But I think it's a question we should be thinking actively about, because really our lives are changing a lot. We're not going to go back to the office the same way. We're not going to go back to the commute the same way, probably, thank goodness. But we also have opportunities actually to shape our living environment in more sociable ways. I'm putting aside the stresses of COVID, which separate people inevitably, but even post-COVID, these are issues that are going to have to be decided. Of course, citizen engagement is a hallmark of core European political values and institutions. And the truth is, in the end, with all the national plans and all the regional plans, at the end, it has to be implemented locally. Where are you going to put the charging stations? How are the roads going to be restructured? These are really local decisions, and people I know in Europe will be involved. So there's no question about that. And the behavioral changes for less wastage, circular economy, more healthful diets that are also beneficial for the environment. This is part of all of our new life challenge and life design challenges. So I think there's a lot of role for individual citizens.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Declan.
Yeah, okay, so on the question on the absence of a target for social spending, this was something which was actually discussed with the co-legislators, the council and the parliament, and in the end it wasn't, it was decided not to proceed that way. I think largely because we didn't want to over-engineer the instrument itself. And you know, you could have piled on target upon target, and it would have made, I mean, very, very complicated to actually manage the instrument. But I think, you know, I think one shouldn't overemphasize the importance of having a precise expenditure target in and of itself. I think you should look at the content of it. The regulation itself does require to focus on social and requires the Commission to report on that. And in fact, if you look at the analysis, which I mean, the accompanying documents, you will see it is reported. So we will actually be reporting in our, you know, we are required to prepare annual reports. So we will be reporting on this. We will be following up. But I think if you just look at the content of the plans, you will see that, you know, anything between 20 to 50% will be could be considered as social. And also a lot of the, you know, the spending in the digital area is and in the green area actually is social in nature. It's targeting the investments in high-speed networks in the more, you know, isolated regions where this is not viable on a private basis. A lot of it goes into digital education and particularly targeting those excluded from, you know, access to whether it's skills or infrastructure. So there's a lot of overlap here. My suggestion would be don't overload don't overstate, I think, the importance of the absence of a target. I mean, just look at what was agreed at the Porto summit recently on social. I think there's no absence of an emphasis on social policies in Europe. Jeffrey asked an interesting question about the, you know, energy networks are you know, interconnected, and having 27 national plans is lovely, but you do need to add them up. So I think the answer to that is we have, of course, I've talked about the Recovery Resilience Facility. We do have, of course, very important spending programs through the EU budget. So the Connecting Europe facility, the Trans-European networks, which are explicitly designed and targeted at these, let's say, cross-border links and European public goods. But the point you make is nonetheless, I think it's an interesting one. And actually it was a criticism which was made at when the Recovery and Resilience Facility was put in place, and it's kind of very bottom up. It's very much centered upon, you know, national plans. Now, this was an explicit choice, and the reason for it was we kind of had a trade-off between recovery and resilience. On the one hand, we needed to act quickly, move quickly, get the funds out into our economies when, you know, when our countries are suffering the economic effects of COVID, and that necessarily kind of forces you to be a little bit short-term and quick. At the same time, you really do want to focus on transformational change and resilience, and that's, you know, the longer-term stuff, and hence the focus on the digital. But, you know, in an ideal world, if you had more time, yeah, you probably would have had a stronger a direct European dimension to this. The way we tried to address this was, it was quickly announced by President von der Leyen that we call these 6 flagship initiatives to try to encourage member states in 6 key areas like sustainable hydrogen or high-speed, you know, high-speed digital networks to work together, and we encourage the member states to do. I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but it would be, you know, of the 25 we've received, it would be more than 20. You have these projects. It varies a bit in terms of the scale and effort, but there definitely was a concerted effort. I guess having had, you know, if we had more time and the luxury of time, maybe that's something we could have put more emphasis on, but that's the way we approached it.
Thank
Good
you so
answer.
much. Thank you so much. And I
I'm gonna
know,
have to go.
Jeffrey, you'll have to go. So thank you so much for joining us, and Olga, Declan as well. I just want to say as a final remark, but Jeffrey, yes, do go. I just want to say a big thank you for joining the discussion today. I think that while very short in time, I think that it provided us an overview that at least in the EU, there is hope, and we see that there is good progress happening, and that we are at least trying to make use of the many tools and to create the future we want. But obviously implementation will be key, and we'll have to watch very carefully and monitor the progress very carefully. But I would like to finish off with something, because I think that we didn't really have a chance to discuss this element, which is obviously the importance of international collaboration. And I think the COVID has itself reminded us of the importance of collaborating in preventing, mitigating, and enhancing resilience in the face of global crisis. And it's not only the pandemics, this will be the same with climate change, with the environmental crisis, and we can only work together. We can only address this if we actually work together. And there certainly is a role for the EU. Also, this autumn, we have the COP15 on ecosystems, on preserving our ecosystems, COP26 on climate action, where the EU certainly can play a role on also trying to get the others on board. So I think that it's essential part of, while we have to continue working on trying to meet our own goals, the EU, it's not alone in the global world, and we need to try to find the means also to support others. And also perhaps our own recovery efforts could be valuable exercise also for some of the other players outside our borders. So hopefully these can provide some lessons also for others. But just want to say thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for our speakers, thank you for our participants for all the questions, and we look forward to continuing the discussion and obviously monitoring progress ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye, everyone.